Hi, I'm Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor has been the definitive source dedicated to recognizing achievement, delivering unrivaled thought leadership, and connecting the world's mergers and acquisitions elite. We help you sharpen your edge and accelerate your success in deal making. Whether you're an ambitious new player or a market veteran, this podcast provides masterclass strategies, unvarnished stories, and vital lessons from the industry's influential figures. Before we launch into this episode, be sure to follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and subscribe to our essential M&A Alerts email newsletter. Find all the links below. Your engagement fuels the deal-making community. Now let's get into the transaction.
Thank you so much for having us here. Maybe we can start with introductions for the group here, and then we can jump into our topic of culture, comfort, and chemistry in M&A deals. So maybe why don't you get started and talk about yourself first?
Sure. Great to meet you, Puneet, and hello to everyone and those watching as well. So I'm Satish Raman. I serve as Chief Strategy Officer at Fractal. We're an artificial intelligence firm. Strangely enough, for having said that, we've been around for 25 years, and we've been doing what is now the buzzword, but back in the day was akin to selling shoes in sub-Saharan Africa. But we've come a long way from there, and I've been involved in corp dev programs for the last 28 years, and I've seen my fair share of M&A transactions.
Awesome, thank you. And then a little bit about myself as well. So I'm from EY-Parthenon, and we do large-scale, big transformations, transactions, both buy-side, sell-side. So happy to be here and talking to you, Satish.
Likewise.
So let's start with the topic: culture, comfort, chemistry, and M&A deals. Right? Why do you think it's an important topic, a relevant topic for our audience here?
Yeah, it's a great question, Puneet, and this is something that has been a very integral part of my own thinking. Even going back, I'd say to the mid '90s, early 2000s, when I started cutting my teeth doing M&A deals. As M&A practitioners, we're almost always focused on, the numerics of every transaction, the quantitative aspects, things that are objective, which are measurable. But when you put all of that away and you're buying a business, you're buying a bunch of contracts, you're buying assets, but the underlying machine that drives all of that is people, right? And even in today's AI world, when you can say there is this world where humans don't need to be a part of that ecosystem, the people creating that ecosystem are humans, right? So bringing that subjective aspect from evaluating how successful a deal is going to be, and how do we derive enough confidence that the deal is going to be successful, because we all know, having done as many deals that we've been involved in or advised, that the success rate is in the single digits, right? In terms of outcomes being at least near where the underwrite case was. So the people aspect of it, at least to us when we evaluate transactions, is a super critical part, because if we don't feel comfortable with the team that we are acquiring, then it doesn't matter how robust the numbers are, the business is, or the addressable market is, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. And I think we can all agree, and we have all seen stats, right? Some of the stats say like 50% or 60% of the acquisitions fail to realize expected synergies, right? And then ultimately it's all about humans coming together and ensuring those synergies are realized. And to your point, right, chemistry and culture, and ultimately it's the people who ensure that those synergies are realized, they are well understood, and are executed.
No, you're actually super spot on, Puneet. Here's my reflection of the people angle, right? Because there are obviously a lot of advisory firms, specialist firms that will come and say, hey, we're going to do a human capital evaluation of the quality of talent, the kind of people, their profiles. But what ends up getting missed is really the pith of the collective soul, if you will, or the collective conscious of the organization, right? I mean, who really are the movers and shakers? Who are the people who are contributing? Because not everyone in every organization is going to be pulling forward with the same velocity and the same purpose. So how do you identify who the KMPs are when you're doing a transaction? Not what the founding team is telling you, or the sponsor group is telling you, or the management team is telling you. What is the buyer's estimate of the core kernel of talent that absolutely needs to be preserved for that business to be successful? And that comes largely through not these formal interviews and all of that. It's just free-flowing sessions over a cup of coffee, over a meal. And that's when you really get to understand the people behind the role. And if they have the same shared values as us as a buyer, then we start saying, okay, we can work with this group of people. Now is the business good enough? And do the numbers work for us to transact? Because with this group, they're going to integrate well with our team because the culture quotient is super high.
Absolutely. Valid point. And then, Satish, in your experience, if you look at an entire M&A deal cycle, right? We have the diligence phase, we have pre-sign, then we have post-merger integration. So if you look at an entire life cycle, based on your experience, like what works well? Like what kind of cultural fit analysis in your experience you have done, and what kind of metrics, just to kind of quantify as well, what has been your experience and any thoughts for the group here?
Okay, I'll share. I've been with Fractal. This is my 9th year. We've done about 10 acquisitions, 2 minority investments, 4 spin-outs, 2 sales of product companies that we've done. So we've done a fair amount of them over the last 9 years. And if I was to start with, when someone sends me a teaser, and when I'm going out into the market looking for, assets that could be of value to us, and we have a small team that I work along with that does that. The first thing that we look for is, who are the people that we're transacting with, right? What is their motivation to transact? What is the motivation of the shareholders to transact, the founding team or the management team to transact? Have they been airdropped into, in a rescue situation? Are they a professional management team that's, just going to wait till the earn-out period is over or the retention period is over and they move on? So a lot of the heavy lifting actually happens in our case, even in a pre-term sheet stage, and we over-index on that. And from there on, it's more about executing towards what we've identified as the KMPs, contracts relating to them, their integration in terms of how they're going to be a part of our organization. And in every acquisition, we ask ourselves 2 questions. One is, what is our right to own the asset? Right? It's not just cash. And what are we bringing to the table, not just what are we getting?
Perfect. No, absolutely makes sense. And, in my transactions as well, we kind of look at the same things too, right? When we get involved, those are typically like big transactions, like multi-billion-dollar, like thousands and thousands of people involved. So qualitative typically becomes difficult because how do you, measure what the people parameters are, like how do we define comfort, how do we define culture, right? So we ultimately end up using a lot of metrics, which are numbers driven, but yes, to your point, like understanding both the numbers as well as the quality side is super critical ultimately to ensure the deal is successful.
True, and I'll just share a few learnings, over the last 30 years of, scraping knees, scratching elbows, breaking teeth, sometimes fracturing a bone, when you get things wrong in doing an acquisition, which is the fundamental human element thesis that you go in with may not always hold true in a post-transaction situation. People change.
Absolutely.
Fundamentally, they remain the same, but people change. So one of the learnings for me personally has been to go as far back in time as possible to understand, where they were raised, where they went to school, what did they do there. And you start forming a mental model of, is their background tying out with what we're hearing them say? Is there enough of a similarity between their thoughts and actions? And we then map that to, we follow, there's a guy who's written this book, Patrick Lencioni, and he mentions the framework saying humble, hungry, and smart. And so that is the rubric that we use in evaluating, people at that point. So one learning is people change, not because they are inherently different. It's just that they act a certain way pre-transaction and may act post-transaction. The second, the real success measure of any acquisition, at least in my heuristic assessment, has been not before the end of 36 months. So anyone that's looking at, okay, first quarter, second quarter, oh, they missed the first year, our underwrite case is terrible. My submission is wait for 3 years and things start working, right? I don't know what it is with that 30 to 36 month period, but that's when things start working. The second aspect is circumstances change, situations change. Our going-in hypothesis of where that individual would fit within our organization may have been flawed from our standpoint, right? So how soon can you identify that? So now in the post-deal situation, there is this, golden glove period that I will say, or, where with each of the KMPs, the deal team or the deal sponsor needs to have as many interactions as possible to validate if where we both agreed they would fit well in the organization is really the place, and do they feel the same way?
Absolutely. I think humble, hungry, and smart, that's a good framework to think about, and agreed, right? Business change, if not on a daily basis, right, on an hourly basis, right? So we may come up with some proposition, we may come up with some governance structure, right, at the diligence phase. Transaction completes, reality may change, right? We may need to move teams, we may need to, let's say, change offices, geography. There are so many factors which come into play, right? Now, I think we transition from the topic of culture to comfort, right? As you were explaining that, when you look at any employee's history, you talk about it, you understand that. I think that's the whole comfort part of the problem that we are discussing right now. So is there anything else you would like to add on comfort? Like, as part of diligence, pre-sign, like how do you ensure the employees from both sides are comfortable with the process?
Okay, I think the way in which at least we have been evaluating this have been in more informal settings, not informal Q&A, advisor-led assessment or evaluation of people. Take them out to a game, take them out to a restaurant, go to a bar, hit the beach, take long walks with them. When they're outside of their office environments or work environments, there is a better chance for you to discover as close to their true selves as they're willing to share. And that gives us a good idea. How they interact with us as a buyer is very different from how they would interact to, let's say, the wait staff in the restaurant, or the bartender, or the taxi driver, or someone selling hot dogs at the game. But that gives you a sense of where they are. Do they treat every human equally? So you pick up these cues, and then you're able to marry that with your own interaction with the individual and seeing if there's a balance, is there symmetry, or are we missing something? So we tried to codify this, but now it's just come down to how we as a deal team feel, as opposed to trying to put some numeric expression of how to define comfort. We tried doing that earlier on, and then we realized we were stupid to try doing that.
Thank you. And then transitioning to the chemistry part, right? We talked about culture, we talked about comfort. Now let's talk about chemistry. Again, leadership chemistry is super critical, right? Especially if the leaders are, let's say, tangentially opposite personalities. That could be a make or break, right? If not before the deal, maybe immediately after the deal, which is not good for the company. So again, any experiences, any thoughts on the topic of chemistry?
Yeah, so on the chemistry front, actually, we do more reflections in the mirror of ourselves. Because one, we don't want to bring people who are super homogenous to what we are as an organization, right? I mean, we're trying to expand and bring as many different schools of thoughts and points of view, because when you're building AI systems and solutions and software which have to work for the world, you can't have a homogeneous view of that, right? So when we think of chemistry, there are people in the world who are not humble, hungry, and smart. But they deserve as much representation with AI systems than people that are just like us, right? So there's a bias elimination that's required when evaluating chemistry. The second reflection for us is we want people to challenge us because, we may seemingly have a dogmatic view of how to deal with situations. But if someone says, it could be a bull in a china shop situation, and that's fine. But are we humble enough to take that feedback, reflect on it, and then decide if it makes sense to act, and does it collectively improve us, right? So there will be points of friction. The question is it healthy friction, or is it personal, in which case that is a red flag to us?
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point. And I think another thing that I can bring from my perspective is, we focused a lot on the buy side, the acquisition side of the deal. I have been involved on multiple sell and separate, divestitures, spins, or sales as well. And it's interesting, as soon as, the different sides are announced, hey, you will go to company A versus you'll go to SpinCo, immediately you can see the emotions change and, personality change, and, you can start seeing those conflicts. So the point is, not only on the acquisition side, but also on the spin or the divestiture side, maintaining culture, maintaining comfort, right? It is super critical.
No, 100%, I agree with you. And I'd love to hear, because you advised on several multi-billion-dollar spin-outs and sales and carve-outs, to get your insights on how you do that. But what I will share in those situations, and this is common in many M&A transactions, which is there's a select few who know that there's some transaction happening and the rest of the organization doesn't, right? The sellers or that core team involved on the seller side is saying, yeah, we think we know how the rest of the organization is going to react, but I'm going to be their representative, right? In many of these situations, we try to get ahead of that by having those conversations long before we get into documentation, but that's as a buyer. But would love to hear, what your experience has been when you spin things out and divest units.
You're absolutely right. Only a select few would know what's happening, right? These are typically confidential deals. My experience has been predominantly with clients which are public, right? So these details are highly sensitive. So there is always this anxiety amongst, leadership, amongst employees. Even some of the CXOs may not know what's happening, right? So what I see is where some companies or some of the clients do really well from leadership perspective is to provide enough inputs to the leadership and hence to the employees through office hours, chats, emails, etc., to ensure that they have enough information, they are able to operate with relevant set of data, right? Because again, the employers would be asked by their stakeholders, right, their suppliers or their customers on, hey, what's happening? So there should be enough transparency, obviously not leaking any internal details on what the transaction is about, what's the deal perimeter, things like those, right? And then typically we as external advisors, when we come in, we have like specific framework on what should be disclosed, what should not be. And again, as long as our clients abide by it, typically things move smoothly.
Fascinating, fascinating. It's almost like a mirror of what we do. But
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are about time, so happy to connect with you all one-on-one after this discussion. But thank you so much, Satish, for taking time out.
Yep, thank you so much, Puneet. Really appreciated the conversation. Thanks.
We hope today's episode delivered actionable intelligence. We want to hear from the field. Share your questions or insights, leave a message on your favorite platform, or email us at editor@maadvisor.com. To secure your steady feed of premium M&A content, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts email newsletter. Find the links in the description below or visit us directly at our website at www.maadvisor.com. I'm Roger Aguinaldo, founder and CEO of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for being part of the M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay decisive, stay connected, and happy dealing.